The Aldridge mansion stood like a palace at the edge of the city, glowing with gold lights every evening. Its marble floors shining so bright, you could almost see your own reflection. Inside, maids rushed around carrying silver trays, polishing chandeliers and arranging flowers that cost more than their monthly pay. Everything was perfect, or at least that's how Mrs. Aldridge wanted it to look. She was the wife of a millionaire businessman, proud, elegant, and sharp-tongued. Her every word carried weight in the house, and her gaze could make even the butler shiver. The servants called her Madam, but behind her back, they whispered other names. They feared her anger more than anything, for one wrong move could cost them their job. Among the workers was Maria, a kind woman in her late 30s, with tired eyes and hands worn from scrubbing floors all day. She had worked for the Aldridges for over 10 years, quiet and obedient, never once talking back. But the only reason she stayed was her son, Daniel, a small boy with dark eyes full of dreams and curiosity. He often waited outside the mansion while his mother cleaned inside, but sometimes she brought him along quietly to help. Daniel loved music, especially the sound of the grand piano in the main hall. It was massive, black, shiny, and beautiful to him. It wasn't just an instrument, it was magic. Whenever the pianist came to play for parties, Daniel would hide behind the curtain, watching the man's fingers dance over the keys. He could remember every note, every rhythm, as if his heart was playing along. Mrs. Aldridge noticed him one day, standing too close to the piano. "What are you doing there, boy?" she snapped. Daniel froze, his little hands shaking. I was just looking, ma'am," he said softly. Her red lips curved into a cold smile. "Looking? At something you'll never touch?" She turned to the guests nearby and laughed. "The maid's son thinks he belongs in a concert hall." The guests chuckled politely, while Maria's face burned with embarrassment. After that day, Mrs. Aldridge began finding excuses to mock him. If she saw him cleaning the floor near the piano, she would say, "Careful, boy. Don't dirty what you can't afford." If he walked too slowly, she would hiss, "You move like you're daydreaming about music again. Wake up." "People like you don't dream." Maria tried to protect him, she would whisper. "Just ignore her, son. We're here to work, not to be seen." But inside, her heart ached every time Mrs. Aldridge humiliated him. She knew Daniel's dreams were bigger than the walls of that mansion, yet she had no way to give him the life he deserved. One evening, as Maria was finishing her chores, she heard faint notes echoing through the empty hall. The piano was playing, but no one was there. Her heart skipped. She tiptoed closer and saw Daniel sitting at the bench, his small fingers moving carefully over the keys. The melody was uneven but beautiful, raw, and full of emotion. "Daniel," she whispered sharply, running toward him. "What are you doing? If Madam sees—" Before she could finish, the sharp sound of heels echoed from the doorway. Mrs. Aldridge stood there, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then she burst into laughter, the kind that cuts deeper than words. "Oh, this is rich. The maid's boy thinks he's a pianist." Maria quickly pulled Daniel away, apologizing again and again. "I'm sorry, ma'am. He didn't mean—" But Mrs. Aldridge raised a hand to silence her. "Keep your little dreamer away from my piano," she said coldly. "That instrument costs more than your life." Her voice dripped with disgust. "Next time I catch him near it, you both can find another place to live." That night, Maria held her son close as they sat in the tiny room behind the mansion. "Don't cry, my love," she whispered. "Let them laugh, let them think we're small. You'll show them one day you'll play, but not for her." "You'll play for the world," Daniel nodded. Wiping his tears, he didn't understand everything. But he knew one thing for sure. The piano wasn't just a dream anymore, it was a promise. A promise to prove that even a maid's son could create music worth hearing. Outside, the rain tapped softly on the window. The mansion stood tall and proud. But in that small, dim room, something brighter was born. A quiet fire inside a little boy's heart. It was the fire that no amount of mockery could ever put out. And though Mrs. Aldridge didn't know it yet, her cruel laughter had just created the beginning of a legend. Maria woke up before sunrise, as she always did, her back aching from the hard wooden bed and her hands still sore from yesterday's cleaning. She quietly folded the thin blanket that kept her and Daniel warm through the night. The small room smelled of soap and damp air, but she smiled when she saw her son still sleeping peacefully, his fingers twitching as if he was playing invisible piano keys even in his dreams. She brushed his hair softly and whispered, "Time to wake up." "My little dreamer." Daniel opened his eyes. blinking against the pale light that slipped through the cracked window. "Do I have to go with you today, Mama?" he asked, his voice still half asleep. Maria hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, they need extra help in the garden, and I don't want you alone here all day." By the time they reached the mansion, the sky was glowing gold. The other maids were already busy, sweeping the marble steps and watering the roses that lined the entrance. Mrs. Aldridge's voice echoed from inside, sharp and commanding, giving orders to the staff as if she were a queen surrounded by servants rather than people. Maria kept her head low and began her work in the kitchen. Daniel helped by carrying small baskets of fruit to the pantry, trying to stay quiet and unseen. But his eyes kept drifting toward the grand hallway, where the piano stood gleaming under the morning light. The sight pulled at his heart like a whisper he couldn't ignore. He remembered the melody he'd played in secret, the one that got him scolded. But he also remembered the feeling it gave him, a feeling of being alive, of belonging to something beautiful. While he stacked apples and polished glasses, his mind hummed the same tune again and again. Later that day, Mrs. Aldridge entered the kitchen in her silk robe, holding a cup of coffee she hadn't even tasted. "Maria," she said without looking up, "make sure that boy of yours doesn't wander again. I don't need dirty footprints near my piano." Maria bowed slightly. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly, but inside she felt a burn of shame mixed with anger. After Mrs. Aldridge left, the head cook, an older woman named Eliza, sighed. "Don't let her words break you, Maria," she said softly. "That lady's heart is as cold as her jewelry." Maria gave a weak smile. "I'm used to it," she replied, "but I wish she'd leave my boy alone." In the evening, after the mansion quieted down, Maria and Daniel cleaned the hall. The chandeliers sparkled above them, casting a golden glow across the room. The piano stood in its corner, untouched since the last party. Daniel couldn't help it. He paused, looking at it again. "Go ahead," Maria whispered suddenly, surprising even herself. "Touch it." Just for a moment, Daniel's eyes widened. "Really?" She nodded. "But softly, we'll be gone before anyone knows." He stepped forward, his small hands trembling, and pressed a single key. The note was pure, clear, and delicate. He pressed another, then another, until the room filled with a gentle tune. Maria watched him, tears forming in her eyes. There was something about the way he played, not perfect, not trained, but honest. The music spoke. It told stories of struggle, of hope, of love that refused to give up. But before the moment could last, the door suddenly opened. Mrs. Aldridge stood there again, her expression frozen in disbelief. "You just never learn, do you?" she hissed. Her heels clicked sharply as she walked closer. "I warned you once," she said. "You and your son are done here." Maria dropped to her knees. "Please, ma'am, don't. He meant no harm." "Enough!" Mrs. Aldridge snapped. "You think I'll tolerate this kind of disobedience in my house? You're both lucky I haven't thrown you out already." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Mrs. Aldridge turned toward Daniel, her eyes filled with cold amusement. "Tell me, boy," she said mockingly, "do you really think you can play that piano? That you can be something more than a servant's son?" Daniel swallowed hard but said nothing. His heart pounded in his chest. Mrs. Aldridge laughed. "Fine then," she said suddenly. "Let's make this interesting. If you can play something that impresses me, I'll adopt you myself." Her tone was dripping with sarcasm. "But if you fail, you'll never set foot in my house again." Maria gasped. "Ma'am, please." "Quiet," Mrs. Aldridge interrupted. "Let's see what this little prodigy can do." Daniel's knees felt weak. His hands trembled as he sat down on the piano bench. The room was so silent that even the ticking clock seemed to stop. Maria stood behind him, whispering a prayer under her breath. Then Daniel began to play. At first the notes stumbled. Uneven and unsure, Mrs. Aldridge smirked, ready to laugh again. But then something changed. Daniel closed his eyes and let the music take over. His small fingers found the rhythm, the melody flowing smoother with each touch. He played the tune his mother used to hum while washing dishes, a soft, haunting melody full of love and sadness. The notes rose and fell like a story being told without words. Mrs. Aldridge froze, her laughter fading. Even the maids peeking through the doorway stood still. When the last note faded, Daniel opened his eyes, breathing heavily. Maria clutched her chest, tears running down her face. The room remained quiet. No one dared to speak. Mrs. Aldridge stood there for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, She turned away sharply. "Pack your things," she said coldly. "You're both leaving first thing in the morning." Maria's heart sank, but Daniel didn't cry. He looked at the piano one last time and whispered to himself, "One day I'll play again and she'll have to listen." That night, as they packed their few belongings, Maria hugged her son tightly. "You made me proud," she whispered. "You showed her who you are." Daniel smiled faintly. "I just played what I felt," he said. And though they left the mansion the next day with nothing, something far greater was growing inside that little boy. A spark that no cruelty could ever destroy. The spark of true talent and unshakable faith. The next morning, the air was cold and heavy with silence as Maria and Daniel walked away from the Aldridge mansion. Maria carried a small bag with their clothes, and Daniel held an old notebook full of songs he had written down from memory. His steps were slow, but his eyes stayed bright. He didn't cry. Not even once. Behind them, the mansion stood tall and proud, its windows glinting in the sunlight like watchful eyes. Mrs. Aldridge watched from her balcony, her arms crossed. She expected to feel satisfied, but instead, she felt something strange, a quiet unease. There was something about that boy's music she couldn't forget. It had touched a place in her heart she had long buried. Meanwhile, Maria and Daniel reached the crowded streets of the city. The smell of bread and smoke filled the air. Vendors shouted, carriages passed by, and the world seemed too big for two people with nowhere to go. Maria sighed deeply. "We'll find something," she said softly. "I'll take any job I can, and maybe you can go to school one day." Daniel nodded, but his gaze drifted toward a small music shop nearby. Instruments hung in the window, violins, guitars, and a single dusty keyboard. He stopped for a moment, his reflection staring back at him through the glass. "Mama," he said quietly, "do you think I can learn more music?" Maria smiled sadly. "You already have music inside you," she replied. "No one can take that away." Days turned into weeks. They found shelter in a small basement apartment where the walls were cracked. But at least it was theirs. Maria started cleaning houses again, though none were as grand as the Aldridge estate. Daniel spent most of his time helping her and practicing tunes on a piece of cardboard he had drawn with piano keys. One afternoon, as Maria worked in the home of a kind old lady named Mrs. Bennet, Daniel sat near the window tapping on his pretend piano. Mrs. Bennet noticed and smiled. "What are you doing, young man?" she asked. Daniel blushed. "I'm practicing," he said, "but I don't have a real piano." Mrs. Bennet's eyes softened. "Ah, music," she said. "My late husband loved it, too." She disappeared into another room and returned holding a small wooden keyboard. "It's old, but it still works. You can have it." Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief. "Really?" he whispered. "Yes," she said, smiling warmly. "Every gift deserves to be used by someone who loves it." That evening, Maria came home and found Daniel playing the old keyboard. The sound was rough and uneven, but to her, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. She hugged Mrs. Bennet the next day, her eyes full of tears. "You've given him a dream again," she said. For the next few months, Daniel practiced every single day. He learned faster than anyone expected. Sometimes when Maria returned from work, she found neighbors standing outside the window, listening quietly to the music floating through the air. One night, as Daniel played, there was a knock on the door. Maria opened it to find a well-dressed man standing there. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said kindly. "My name is Mr. Collins. I run a local music school. I've been hearing someone play from this building for the last few nights. May I ask who it is?" Maria hesitated, then pointed to Daniel. The man stepped inside, listening as the boy played an original melody he had made himself. When Daniel finished, Mr. Collins stood in silence, then smiled. "You have an ear for music, boy," he said, "and a heart that understands it. Would you like to learn properly?" Maria's breath caught in her throat. We can't afford lessons," she said. But Mr. Collins shook his head. "You won't pay a cent. Talent like this deserves a chance." Daniel could hardly believe it. The man gave him a small note for free admission to his academy. "Come tomorrow," he said. "I'll be waiting." That night, Maria sat with her son, unable to stop smiling. "Do you see?" she said softly. "Even when doors close, others open. Maybe this is the start of something new." Daniel nodded. "I'll make you proud, Mama," he whispered. The next day, they arrived at the academy. It was nothing like the Aldridge mansion, no gold, no chandeliers, but to Daniel, it felt like paradise. He met other students, some rich, some poor, but all drawn by the same love for music. Mr. Collins introduced him to the piano room, a simple place with worn benches and scratched floors. Daniel sat at the piano, running his fingers over the keys. It felt right, like coming home as he began to play. Other students gathered around, whispering in amazement. Even Mr. Collins smiled proudly. "He plays as if he's telling a story," one student said. Word spread quickly. Within weeks, Daniel became known as the boy who plays from the heart. Local newspapers wrote short stories about him. A journalist even visited the academy, saying, "A poor maid's son with the talent of a genius." Meanwhile, back at the Aldridge mansion, Mrs. Aldridge sat by the window reading that very article. Her hands trembled slightly. Her husband noticed. "Well, what's wrong?" he asked. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The name at the bottom of the page, Daniel, burned in her mind like a haunting melody. That night, for the first time, she walked to the piano room alone. The mansion was silent. She sat down and pressed one key. The sound echoed softly, but it didn't move her the way Daniel's music had. She realized then that all her wealth couldn't create what that poor boy carried so easily. Pure soul. And though she would never admit it, something in her heart whispered the truth she'd spent her whole life denying. That day she mocked him. She hadn't humiliated a maid's son. She had humiliated a future star. Far across the city, Daniel continued to play, unaware that the same woman who once ridiculed him now sat alone, haunted by the sound of a melody she could never forget, the melody that had changed both their lives forever. Months passed, and Daniel's life began to change in quiet but powerful ways. The dusty keyboard from Mrs. Bennet had become his treasure. He practiced every morning before the sun rose and every night after his mother fell asleep. The small apartment echoed with music, not perfect but full of feeling. Each note carried a promise that he would make his mother proud, that he would never let Mrs. Aldridge's cruelty define him. At the music academy, Daniel quickly became one of the most talked about students. His teachers were amazed at how naturally he understood melodies. It was as if he could hear emotions, sadness, hope, joy, and turn them into music. But even as praise poured in, Daniel stayed humble. He never forgot where he came from one afternoon. Mr. Collins entered the piano room where Daniel was practicing a complex piece. "You play like someone twice your age," he said with a proud smile. "Have you ever thought about performing in front of an audience?" Daniel blinked in surprise. "Me? In front of people?" Mr. Collins nodded. "There's a charity concert next month. It's small, but many important guests attend. I want you to be part of it." Daniel's heart raced. It was his first chance to play for the world, not just for himself or his mother, but for everyone who ever thought he couldn't. When he told Maria that night, she gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered, "your time is coming." I knew it. They hugged each other tightly, tears of joy running down their cheeks. The following weeks were filled with practice. Daniel would sometimes play until his fingers hurt. Mrs. Bennet would stop by, bringing soup or tea. "Don't forget to rest, my boy," she'd say, smiling. Maria watched from the doorway every evening, her heart swelling with pride and fear at the same time. What if he fails? She sometimes thought, what if people laugh at him again? But every time he played, her worries melted away. The night of the concert arrived. The music hall was grand, though not as large as the Aldridge mansion. Velvet curtains framed the stage, and golden lights cast a warm glow over the audience. Wealthy donors, musicians, and families filled the seats. Maria sat in the back row, her hands clutching a small cross around her neck, whispering silent prayers. When Daniel's name was announced, the crowd clapped politely. A thin boy with messy hair and nervous eyes walked onto the stage. He sat at the piano, his heart pounding so hard it almost drowned out the sound of the audience breathing. He looked toward the crowd and saw his mother smiling through tears. That was all he needed. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The melody started soft, uncertain, like a child taking its first steps. Then it grew stronger, deeper, telling a story only he knew. It was the story of a poor boy who once touched a piano in secret, of a mother who never stopped believing, of laughter that hurt and kindness that healed. As the final notes lingered in the air, the room went silent. Then suddenly, everyone stood clapping. Some even shouted, "Bravo!" Maria wept openly, hiding her face in her hands. Mr. Collins smiled proudly, whispering to another teacher, "He's not just talented, he's special." Backstage, reporters and teachers surrounded Daniel. Asking questions, shaking his hand, one of them said, "There's a famous patron in the audience tonight. He might want to sponsor your education." Daniel didn't know what to say. Everything felt like a dream, and then among the crowd a familiar voice spoke. "Impressive." The sound made Daniel freeze. He turned slowly. Mrs. Aldridge stood there, elegant as ever, her eyes sharp but different now, not filled with mockery but something else. Regret. Maria, who had come backstage to hug her son, stopped in her tracks, her heart raced. "Madam," she whispered under her breath. Mrs. Aldridge stepped closer, looking Daniel up and down. "So it really was you," she said quietly. "The papers mentioned your name." "But I didn't believe it at first." Daniel said nothing. His fingers still trembling, Mrs. Aldridge sighed, glancing at Maria. "You raised him well," she said. "I was cruel before." Her voice cracked slightly. "I see now that talent doesn't belong to the rich alone." Maria didn't reply. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said everything, forgiveness mixed with pain. Mrs. Aldridge turned to Daniel again. "You played beautifully," she said softly. "If you ever need support, my family's foundation could help you." Daniel looked at her, the same woman who had once laughed at him for touching a piano. He smiled politely. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, "but I already have everything I need." He turned and walked away toward his mother. Mrs. Aldridge stood there, frozen, watching the boy disappear into the crowd for the first time in her life. She realized that all her money, her mansion, and her pride had never brought her the kind of peace that music just had. That night, as Maria and Daniel walked home under the city lights, the streets felt warmer. People nodded at them, smiling. Some even stopped to congratulate Daniel. Maria looked at her son. "Do you see, my love?" she whispered. "You didn't just play music. You played your story and the world listened." Daniel looked up at the night sky, his eyes reflecting the stars. "I just wanted to play for you, Mama," he said, "but maybe it was meant for everyone." Maria wrapped her arm around him as they walked. The world no longer seemed as cold or cruel as before, and somewhere far away inside a lonely mansion, Mrs. Aldridge sat by her piano, pressing one single key, wishing that just for once, it could sound the way Daniel's had, alive, pure and full of heart. The morning after the concert, sunlight streamed through the small apartment window, painting golden lines across the walls. Maria stirred a pot of porridge while Daniel sat beside the old wooden keyboard, replaying the night in his mind. The sound of applause still echoed in his ears. It felt unreal. The same boy who once scrubbed floors in a mansion had now played on a grand stage. Maria placed a bowl in front of him and smiled. "Eat, my star," she said. Daniel grinned shyly. "I'm not a star, Mama," he murmured. "Not yet," Maria laughed softly. "To me, you always were." But before they could finish breakfast, there was a knock on the door. Maria froze. Knocks usually meant bills, not blessings. When she opened it, Mr. Collins stood there holding a small envelope. "Good morning," he greeted warmly. "I hope I'm not intruding." Daniel jumped to his feet. "Mr. Collins." "Come in, sir." He stepped inside, looking around the humble room with kind eyes. "I wanted to tell you in person," he said, handing the envelope to Daniel. "The organizers were deeply impressed by your performance last night. One of the sponsors, Lord Hemsworth, has offered you a full scholarship to the National Music Conservatory." For a moment, neither Daniel nor Maria could speak. Maria covered her mouth in shock, tears already forming. "A scholarship?" she whispered. "But that's one of the biggest institutions in the country." Mr. Collins nodded, smiling. "It is, and Daniel's spot is confirmed. You'll start next term." Daniel's heart pounded as he opened the letter inside, reading his name printed in gold letters. He couldn't believe it. His dream was no longer just a hope, it was real. When Mr. Collins left, Maria sat down, still trembling. "You did it. My son," she whispered. "You turned their laughter into applause." Daniel hugged her tightly. "No, Mama," he said softly. "We did it." The next months passed in a blur of preparation. The scholarship provided everything: uniforms, books, even a small allowance. Daniel practiced harder than ever, spending hours each day at the piano. The conservatory felt like a different world, filled with students from every corner of the country. Some were friendly, some jealous, but all respected his talent. One day, during a break, Daniel sat by the garden fountain, playing quietly. A young girl with golden hair approached him. "You're Daniel, right?" she asked. "The one who played at the charity concert?" He nodded a bit shyly. Yes, that was me, she smiled. My father was there. He couldn't stop talking about you. I'm Clara. They became fast friends. Clara was from a wealthy family but surprisingly humble. She admired Daniel's playing and often stayed late to listen. You play with feeling, she told him one evening. Most students play for perfection, but you play for the heart. Daniel smiled. Maybe because that's all I had, he said quietly. Weeks turned into months. Daniel's name spread further. He won local competitions, performed in youth concerts, and his teachers began calling him the prodigy with the soul of an old master. But amid the success, he never forgot his mother's sacrifices. Every coin he earned, he saved for her, promising himself that one day she'd never have to work again. Then one afternoon, as he walked out of the conservatory, a sleek black car pulled up beside him. The window rolled down, and there she was, Mrs. Aldridge, elegant as ever, but with lines of age and guilt etched across her face. Daniel, she said softly, may I have a moment? He froze, unsure how to respond. Of course, he said cautiously. She stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. I came to see your performance, she said. You were magnificent. Daniel nodded politely. Thank you, ma'am. She hesitated, then sighed. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she began. I was cruel to you and your mother. I let my pride blind me. I wanted to reach out sooner, but I didn't know how. Her voice cracked slightly. I saw the articles, the stories, and I realized what I'd done. Daniel studied her face. The woman who once humiliated him now stood trembling, not with power, but with remorse. People can change, he said gently. Maybe you just learned too late. Mrs. Aldridge swallowed hard. Perhaps, she whispered, but I want to make things right. I can help you and fund your future, support your mother. Whatever you need. Daniel smiled sadly. You already helped me, ma'am, he said softly. The day you mocked me, you gave me a reason to prove you wrong. Tears filled her eyes. She had never been spoken to with such quiet strength. You're your mother's son, she murmured. Strong, kind, and far greater than I ever was. She extended a card. If you ever need anything, please call. Daniel took it politely but knew he never would. Thank you, he said simply. But I already have all I need. Love, purpose, and music. That night, he returned home and told Maria about the meeting. She listened quietly, stirring her tea. When he finished, she smiled gently. You forgave her without saying the words, she said. That's the power she'll never understand. Daniel looked at the small wooden keyboard sitting in the corner. Worn from years of use. That's where it all began, he whispered. That's where I learned to play. Maria nodded. And that's where you learned what truly matters. As the night deepened, Daniel sat at the piano again, this time writing a new piece, one filled with warmth, forgiveness, and light. The melody rose softly through the window, floating out into the city, touching hearts that didn't even know his name. Somewhere across town, Mrs. Aldridge sat by her grand piano, listening to the faint music drifting from the open streets. For the first time in years, she closed her eyes, letting the melody wash over her. And in that moment she wept, not out of guilt, but out of something new, something like peace. Back in the small apartment, Maria watched her son play. Her heart full, she whispered quietly, You've given the world your music, but you've given me my life back. Daniel smiled without looking up. No, Mama, he said softly. You gave me the first note. And the music continued. Steady, beautiful, eternal. Months rolled into years, and Daniel's world kept expanding. His name was now whispered in music halls, printed in newspapers, and spoken in conversations among the wealthy and the poor alike. The boy who once touched a forbidden piano in a mansion had become a symbol of talent born from hardship, but fame never changed his heart. He still lived simply with Maria, still cooked breakfast for her, and still played the same old wooden keyboard every morning before touching the grand pianos at the conservatory. One winter morning, a letter arrived sealed with gold wax. Maria handed it to Daniel as he returned from his lessons. It looks important, she said curiously. Daniel opened it carefully, his eyes widening as he read. Mama, they want me to perform at the Royal Philharmonic Hall. Maria gasped, her hands trembling. The Royal Hall? That's where only the greatest musicians play, she said breathlessly. Daniel nodded, almost too stunned to speak. They've chosen me to perform at the Winter Gala. It's being broadcast across the country. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. Then Maria hugged her son tightly. whispering through tears. "This is it, Daniel. The dream you used to whisper about while cleaning those marble floors. It's happening." The following weeks were a blur of rehearsals, meetings and interviews. Reporters followed Daniel everywhere, asking questions about his past, about how a maid's son had risen so high. He always gave the same calm answer. "My mother taught me everything I needed to know. Hard work, kindness, and never giving up." Despite the excitement, Daniel often felt nervous. The Royal Hall wasn't just another stage. It was a symbol of everything he had fought for. He wanted to make the performance perfect. Not for himself, but for his mother, for Mrs. Bennet, for Mr. Collins, and for every child who had ever been told they weren't good enough. One evening, a week before the concert, Daniel visited Mrs. Bennet. The old woman's health had weakened, but her eyes still sparkled with warmth. "You've grown so much. My boy," she said, holding his hand. "But when you play, don't think of the audience. Play for the people who believed in you." Daniel nodded, her words sinking deep into his heart. The night of the winter gala arrived. The city streets glowed with lights and snowflakes. Limousines lined the entrance of the Royal Philharmonic Hall. Inside, the audience buzzed with anticipation. Noblemen, politicians, and artists filled every seat. Maria sat in the front row, wearing a simple blue dress Daniel had bought her, clutching a small locket that held his childhood picture. Backstage, Daniel closed his eyes, breathing deeply. He could hear the murmur of the crowd, the soft tuning of instruments, and his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. Mr. Collins, now gray-haired and proud, placed a hand on his shoulder. "No matter what happens out there," he said, "remember, music is not about perfection. It's about truth." Daniel stepped onto the stage. The applause rose like a wave. Blinding lights shone down on him. He bowed slightly and sat at the piano. For a moment, everything went silent, no sound. No movement, only stillness. Then he began to play. The first notes were gentle, like whispers carried by the wind. The melody told a story, of a small boy staring at a piano he wasn't allowed to touch, of laughter that cut deep, of nights filled with dreams and hunger. Then the music grew stronger, painting the years of struggle, the kindness of strangers, and the warmth of a mother's love as his fingers danced across the keys. The hall transformed into his memory. Every note became a heartbeat. Every chord a tear. It was more than music. It was his life being told without words. When the final note faded, silence filled the room. Then, suddenly, the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, echoing through the hall like a storm of joy. Some people wept openly. Others shouted his name. Maria stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "You did it, my son. You did it." Daniel stood and bowed deeply, his heart pounding with emotion. He could see Mr. Collins smiling proudly from the side, Mrs. Bennet wiping tears in the second row, and even a few familiar faces from his past, including one that caught his breath. Mrs. Aldridge sat quietly near the back of the hall, her eyes glistening. Her once proud posture had softened. When Daniel's eyes met hers, she gave a small nod, not of superiority, but of apology and admiration. After the concert, Daniel walked into the grand foyer. Surrounded by people congratulating him, a journalist asked, "Daniel, after such a breathtaking performance, what message would you like to give to the world?" He paused, then smiled gently. "That talent doesn't belong to money or birth. It belongs to the heart. Music is born from pain, from love, from everything life gives us, rich or poor, and sometimes the strongest songs come from the quietest places." That quote made headlines the next morning. "The boy who played his pain," the papers called him. Maria cut one out and kept it folded in her prayer book, reading it every night before bed. Days later, Daniel received a small letter delivered by hand. It was from Mrs. Aldridge, written in neat cursive. "Daniel, I watched your performance. I wept for what I once was, blind and proud. Your music reminded me what it means to be human. I will never forget that sound. If Maria ever needs anything, my home will always be open. Elizabeth Aldridge." Daniel read it silently, then folded it carefully and placed it inside his piano bench. He didn't hate her anymore. Her cruelty had shaped his path. Her challenge had lit his fire. That night he sat at the window. Snow falling softly outside, Maria was asleep in her chair, and the world felt peaceful. Daniel began composing again, a new song, slower and deeper than any before. It was a song of forgiveness, of love, of the strange way life turns pain into beauty. Each note floated through the air like snowflakes, landing softly on the world that once doubted him. And as the clock struck midnight, Daniel whispered to himself, from mockery to music, "This was always meant to be." Then he smiled, closing his eyes as the music carried on, quiet, powerful, and everlasting. The years that followed Daniel's Royal Hall performance changed his life forever. His name became known not just in his country, but across the world. Invitations flooded in from Paris, New York, Tokyo, and Vienna. Critics called him the miracle pianist, the soul of the keys, and the boy who turned pain into symphony. Yet no matter how grand the stage or how bright the spotlight, Daniel never forgot the small apartment where his journey began, or the woman who gave up everything for him and his mother. Maria watched all this from the background. She never liked attention. Instead, she found joy in the little moments. Cooking breakfast while listening to Daniel's radio interviews, ironing his concert clothes, and waiting up late until he came home from rehearsals. Sometimes she'd smile and whisper, "He's not just my son anymore. He belongs to the world now." But Daniel would always reply, "No, Mama, I'll always be yours first." One evening, Daniel returned home from another tour, exhausted but happy. He dropped his bags by the door and hugged Maria tightly. "It's done," he said. "Europe, America, Asia. I played in all of them." Maria laughed, her eyes shining with pride. "Then rest now, my boy," she said softly. Even stars need to breathe. That night, as Daniel sat by the old wooden keyboard, the same one Mrs. Bennet had given him years ago, he pressed a few keys. The notes were slightly off, a little out of tune, but it made him smile. This, he thought, is where it all started. The next morning, Daniel received a letter sealed with a royal insignia. It was from the palace itself. The Queen had heard of his story and wanted him to compose a special piece for the upcoming Festival of Unity, a grand event celebrating peace across nations. Daniel's hands shook as he read the words. "A performance before royalty," he whispered. "Mama." "They want me to play for the Queen?" Maria gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh, Daniel," she said tearfully, "you'll make history. You'll make every person who ever doubted you see what a Maid son can become." The next few weeks were filled with anticipation. The Queen's Gala was the most prestigious event of the year. Daniel wanted to create something new, a piece that wasn't just music but a story of humanity itself. He worked day and night sketching notes, changing melodies, and listening to the sound of his own heartbeat as inspiration. But even as his fame soared, something deeper stirred inside him, a quiet longing. He began to think of the people who had shaped his path. Mrs. Bennet, now too old to travel, Mr. Collins, who had retired, and even Mrs. Aldridge, whose letter he still kept safely inside his piano bench. They were all threads in his life's song, and he wanted this final piece to honor them one night. While working on the composition, he paused, feeling a strange ache in his chest. "Maybe I've been chasing music so much, I've forgotten to rest," he murmured. But the ache wasn't from exhaustion alone, and it was something heavier. Something that made him clutch his chest and gasp for breath. Maria rushed to his side. "Daniel, what's wrong?" she cried. He smiled weakly, trying to calm her. "Just tired, Mama," he whispered. "Just need a moment." But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. The doctor came the next morning. After a long examination, he sighed. "He's been overworking himself," he said gently. "His heart is under tremendous strain. He needs rest, and months of it." Maria nodded, though her hands trembled. "He'll rest," she said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." But Daniel couldn't rest. "Not yet, Mama," he said softly one evening. "I need to finish this piece. It's not for fame. It's for everyone who believed in me. It's my thank you to the world." So he worked slowly, carefully. Each note felt like a heartbeat. Fragile but full of purpose, he named the composition "The Hands That Raised Me," dedicated to Maria and to all who had lifted him when the world tried to push him down. On the night of the Queen's Festival, Daniel arrived backstage. Pale but determined, Maria begged him, "You don't have to do this, my son. Your health matters more than any performance." He smiled gently. "Mama," he said, "my music is my heart, and if it stops today, let it stop while I'm giving it to the world." When he stepped on stage, the crowd rose to greet him with thunderous applause, but Daniel didn't hear it. All he could feel was the pulse of the piano beneath his fingertips. He began to play. The music started soft like a lullaby, then grew into something powerful and soaring. It carried the echo of his childhood laughter, the sting of mockery, the warmth of his mother's love, and the sound of dreams coming true. Each note felt like a heartbeat, steady yet fading, pure yet fragile. In the final moments, as the melody reached its peak, Daniel felt tears slide down his face. He pressed the last keys, holding the final chord as if he could freeze that moment forever. The hall was utterly silent. No one dared to move. When the sound faded, Daniel slowly stood, bowed deeply, and then his vision blurred, the lights dimmed, and the piano keys slipped from his touch. He collapsed quietly onto the stage. Gasps filled the hall. Maria screamed from the front row. Running toward him, his hands were still warm. Still resting on the piano, the medics rushed forward. But Daniel's last smile lingered, peaceful, content, as if he had finally given the world everything he had. That night, the Queen herself stood to announce, he did not just play music, he played humanity. The piece, The Hands That Raised Me, became a legend, played in schools, halls, and churches around the world, and in every performance. Maria sat quietly in the front row, holding her son's old wooden keyboard close to her heart, whispering, he kept his promise, he made them all listen, and somewhere beyond the stars, where sound never fades, Daniel's music played on, soft, eternal and full of love. The world mourned the loss of Daniel more deeply than anyone could have imagined. For weeks his name echoed through the airwaves, across newspapers and in the hearts of millions who had been touched by his music. Crowds gathered outside the royal hall, leaving flowers, letters, and candles near the piano where he had played his final piece. They called him the boy who played his heart until it stopped. But in the quiet of a small apartment far from the city's noise, Maria sat alone, her hands wrapped around Daniel's old wooden keyboard, the same one that had carried their dreams through years of struggle. The room felt painfully empty. His shoes were still by the door, his notebooks still stacked neatly on the table, as if he would walk in any minute and say, Mama, listen to this new tune. Tears blurred her eyes, but through her pain there was a strange calmness. Her son had lived his life exactly as he wanted, pure, brave, and kind. He had turned pain into beauty and left behind something that would never die, his music. A week later, the palace invited Maria to a private ceremony. The Queen herself wanted to honor Daniel's legacy. Maria hesitated at first, but then she remembered her son's words. Mama, you'll stand among them one day. Not as a maid, but as the mother of a legend, so she went, dressed in the same simple blue dress she had worn to his final concert. When she entered the royal hall, everyone stood. Musicians, ministers, even nobles bowed their heads respectfully. The Queen approached her gently and said, Your son's music reminded us all of what humanity truly means. It spoke of love, forgiveness, and hope, the things this world forgets too easily. Maria bowed her head, tears glistening. He was just a boy who loved the piano, she said softly. He only ever wanted to make people feel something. The Queen smiled kindly, and he did. His final piece, The Hands That Raised Me, will be performed every year at this festival. In his honor, Maria gasped softly. Every year? Yes, the Queen said. Forever. His story will live through his music. The orchestra began to play, and the first notes of Daniel's final masterpiece filled the hall. Maria closed her eyes, letting the melody wrap around her like her son's embrace. Every rise and fall of the piano sounded like his voice whispering, Don't cry, Mama, I'm still here. After the ceremony, people came to her one by one, students, musicians, strangers, all thanking her for raising him. Some brought small trinkets, old concert tickets, and photographs of Daniel smiling beside them. He inspired me to play again, said one young boy. He showed me that music doesn't belong to the rich, said another. Maria smiled through her tears. That's what he wanted, she said. To make people believe. Months passed and life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Maria spent her days tending a small flower garden and writing letters to Daniel that she never sent. Each night she lit a candle beside his photograph and whispered prayers of gratitude instead of sorrow. One afternoon, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, she found a familiar figure, Mrs. Aldridge, older, frailer, but with soft eyes that no longer carried pride. May I come in? She asked gently. Maria hesitated, then nodded. They sat at the table, silence filling the space between them. Mrs. Aldridge looked around the small home, at the keyboard, the framed photos, and the medals on the wall, her eyes filled with tears. "I came to say I'm sorry," she whispered. "No apology can erase what I did, but I needed to tell you. Your son changed me. He changed so many." Maria's eyes softened. "He forgave you long ago," she said quietly. "His music did that for him." Mrs. Aldridge wiped her tears, reaching into her purse and placing a small box on the table. "I found this in our old mansion," she said. "It's a music box Daniel once touched as a boy. I think it belongs to you now." Maria opened it gently. Inside was a tiny figure of a pianist, and when she wound the key, it played a faint melody, the same one Daniel had played the first time he touched the Aldridge piano, the same melody that had once silenced a room full of laughter. Maria smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's still finding ways to come home," she whispered. Mrs. Aldridge nodded. "He was more than a boy with talent, he was a mirror. He made us all see who we really were from that day on." Maria and Mrs. Aldridge met often, not as maid and mistress, but as two mothers bound by the same boy, one who had taught them both the meaning of grace. Years later, Daniel's story spread across the world. Films were made, books were written, and statues were built in his memory. Yet Maria never sought attention. She spent her final years quietly, surrounded by music, flowers, and peace. On her last night, as she lay in bed with the window open, the wind carried a familiar tune through the room. It was Daniel's melody, soft, pure, and full of love. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Play for me one more time." "My son." And in that peaceful moment, Maria took her last breath, her soul carried gently by the same music that had given her life purpose. The next morning, neighbors found the candle beside her still burning, and the music box playing softly. The world said goodbye to Maria Aldridge, the woman who had raised a legend at the Royal Hall. The Queen ordered a new inscription beneath Daniel's statue. He played for love, and love answered in music. Every year on the anniversary of his final performance, the grand piano is opened again, the lights dim, and a young student, chosen for their heart, not their wealth, sits and plays The Hands That Raised Me. And though Daniel and Maria are gone, their story still whispers through every note, reminding the world that kindness, courage, and love can rise from even the humblest beginnings. The melody never ends. It simply finds new hands to carry it forward, generation after generation, the song of a boy who turned pain into beauty, and a mother who never stopped believing in him,